Hello. So I am thinking I'm live and I'm really hoping this week you can hear me. So please, someone steal my very anxious heart and send me a message on the comments to make sure that you can actually hear me. I'm holding out with bated breath. Please let me know you can hear me. Is there anybody there? Well, no one's saying you can't hear me. So that's an improvement from last week when everyone was saying they couldn't hear me. Oh, Gary, thank you. I was starting to panic. Oh, it was such a disaster last week. Don't know if you were here, but oh my goodness, what a panic. All right. So thank you so much, Gary, for letting me know that you can at least hear me. So I'm going to wait a few minutes. It usually takes a while for it to pop up in YouTube and for people to realize that I'm here and I'm live. So keep yourself occupied for a few minutes and then we will get started. Although I wonder whether I should just sit here and talk so that people who arrive actually know that they can hear me. So maybe I'll natter quietly. Gary, where are you from? Gary, I've just read what you've said. Oh my goodness, that's so exciting. Congratulations. So you got your job at Amazon. That's amazing, Gary. What job did you get? Just whilst everybody else is arriving, if you don't mind, tell us what amazing role you snaffled at Amazon. I'm so excited for you, Gary. Hi, Dan. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Gary, you're going to tell us. Come on now. I'm excited to hear about it. I could guess, but there are so many roles. I would probably be so far off. It would be insane. Dan, Andrew, welcome. Hi, Saurav. How are you? Nice to see you again. Where's everyone coming from today? Gary, where are you from? Dan, Andrew, Saurav. Germany. Awesome. Awesome. Welcome. Guten Tag. Yay. I know I've got that one right. Oh, Gary, AWS Data Center Engineering Ops. Ooh, that's going to be a good job. Congrats, Gary. That is amazing. I'm very proud of you. Well done. Ciao, Steve. Lovely to have you back again today. One of my very regulars. Great to see you again. Always a pleasure to have you here, Steve. Stumble and Gallivant. Definitely. I know your name. So welcome back. Delighted to have you. Andrew, you're also coming from Germany. Oh, I'm popular in Germany today. I suppose it's just after lunch, really. It's like 3:30, isn't it? So it's tea time. A cup of tea, or I don't know if tea's a big thing in Germany. Is tea a big thing in Germany? I don't know. But tea time anyway here. Ciao, Luca. Lovely to see you. Michael, thank you very much. From Regina. Very good. Kamlesh from the US. You can be a bit more specific, Kamlesh. Where in the US? I did place as far as I know. So come on, tell us where you're from specifically, Kamlesh. That would be cool. All right, so let's go then. So we've got a fair chunk of people here now. So I'll get started and then we can see how it goes. You guys who've been here before, you know, I usually run this for about 45 minutes to an hour. To be fair, I usually run over to an hour. So let me give you the spiel and then we will get going. So as a lot of you know, I am Gigi. This is me here on my jumper. This is how I see myself anyway. And I am the Amazon interview whiz. I interviewed and bar raised over 5 years at Amazon, and I have literally hired hundreds of Amazonians across all walks of life, like tech, non-tech, any type of role you could imagine. Obviously not all roles, but a huge spread around the entire Amazon group, both in Europe and in US and in Asia. So I now run my own Amazon interview preparation academy. which is effectively a program of e-learning modules that I created to try and make Amazon interview coaching much more accessible to everybody. Usually it's very expensive to get yourself an Amazon interview coach, and my course means you can get access to exactly the same expertise at about 90% less cost than it would usually. I do have a mantra, which is Amazon interview expertise for all. I've been working very hard to democratize Amazon interview expertise, so it's not just for those who have plenty of spare cash to throw around. And that's why I created my YouTube channel, and that's why I do these free sessions. So a little bit of housekeeping. I will not be answering technical questions. There are like 250 technical job families in Amazon, and no one person could possibly be an expert in all of those. So I will not be able to answer specific technical questions. I will try and pick questions that are useful for as many people as possible. And I will ask you guys not to ask me for general advice. I often get, I'm doing an ex-manager interview tomorrow. Any general tips? I have 2.5 hours worth of general tips on my YouTube channel. So if you're looking for general tips after this session, please go to YouTube. I imagine almost every question anyone has ever asked me or could ask me is now in a video on that channel. And if it's not where on that channel, send me a message in the comments and I will add it to my backlog. Okay. So let's get going. I will read the comments, and the way we work is you guys put questions in the comments. I will read through them and I will try to answer them as best I possibly can, which is usually pretty good. And as people arrive, I'll say hello as well. This is always nice to greet people. So why don't we just get going? I'm now going to turn my attention to the comments and see what we have. So a few hellos since I started my spiel. Okay. Let me see what I've got. Okay, Stumble and Gallivant. What did you cleared your recruiter phone interview last week after my session? Yes, I remember that was happening. Well done. Yes. Brilliant. Round 2 in a couple of days. That's awesome. Thank you for letting me know. It's so good to hear. Who else have we got here? All right, welcome. Beginning full 12. Thank you for joining us. There's definitely a username I haven't heard before, so thank you for joining and welcome. Iatha, I'm going to go for that. Party16 THARPR. That's a great username. I will never be able to pronounce it. I think I might just go for Liatha. I'm very well. Thank you for joining us. Okay. And all right. So G_D Sun, welcome back. I definitely recognize your username. I am very well, thank you. I'm having a lovely day. It's nice and sunny where I am. So this is ownership, right? A grey area that you... okay. Oh, let me just have a look at this. So it looks like you were asked a question that says, tell me about a grey area that you solved with a long-term solution. Yes, I would say that is ownership. So the grey area, I mean, it's a little bit of an interesting phraseology. This is definitely not written in this exact fashion in the Amazon interview question bank. But you're right. I think a grey area intimates it doesn't really fall into anybody's specific remit. So it's a grey area. Anybody could claim ownership of it to the point of ownership. And then with a long-term solution. So one of the key behaviors that they're looking for in ownership is that when you are coming up with a solution, that you are very much thinking about a solution that has a long-term implication, that you're making sure you're really thinking about the consequences of the decision that you're making on the future. And maybe if you're not even around, people in the future and the future. So yes, G_D Sun, I would suggest that is an ownership question. And if that's what you chose to go with in your interview, well done. Okay, let's move on and see what else we've got. We're a bit light on questions, guys, today. You're relying on each other to ask good questions. So just bang them in there, guys. I'm sure there's loads of great questions that you've got hanging around. Don't be embarrassed to ask anything either. I'm very much of the school that there are no stupid questions. only stupid people who can't answer the questions. But of course, that's not me. So just chuck them in there, guys. Don't be embarrassed. All right. So Davi, welcome. Thank you for joining. Let's have a look at your question. I'm going to pin this one for you then. Okay. So I hope it's showing up now. So is it possible to participate in the recruiting process for 2 different roles? Yes, it absolutely is. So I think I'm reading into your question, Davi, that there are maybe 2 roles that you're interested in. Either you're already halfway through the process with one and you're thinking about applying for another, or maybe you've seen both and you want to apply for them both. So it is very possible to be in process into kind of jobs at any given time. The people, the recruiters and the hiring manager will see that that's the case. Now, they're unlikely to hold it against you, as it were, in terms of applying for 2 different roles, because people want to work at Amazon, and everybody knows inside Amazon that people want to work at Amazon, and they will try and find the right role for them to enable them to do that. But one of the big watch outs I would say, Davi, is that you want to be making sure that you're applying for roles that are quite similar. Because if you're applying for 2 program manager roles just in different groups, or if you're applying for 2 vendor manager roles just in different groups, or software development engineer, but just in different groups, clearly you have a career path in mind: vendor manager, product manager, program manager, software development engineer. And it can completely make sense to those different hiring managers and recruiters as to why you would submit 2 applications at any given time, because you want to be a program manager at Amazon. So if that happens, they'll be like, yeah, it makes total sense, and it's on me to get through my process as quickly as possible in case they're a great candidate and I want to snaffle them. Where it becomes a little bit more unstable ground is where you are maybe applying for completely different roles. So using the set that I used a minute ago, if perhaps you're applying for a vendor manager in one part of the business and a product manager in the other part of the business, the 2 hiring managers and recruiters for those individual roles are going to be looking at that going, what does Davi want to be? Does Davi want to be a vendor manager, or does Davi want to be a product manager? And how do I know that Davi really wants my role if he's off there looking for a different type of role completely elsewhere? So that would be my only proviso, is if you are making multiple applications to Amazon, really you want to make sure that you're doing them within very, very similar job families, because then it totally makes sense why you would do that, because you want to work at Amazon and you are a vendor manager. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I'm going to move on to my next question. Thank you very much for asking that one. Okay. Okay, Kai, let me add you there. Kai Young, thank you. Welcome to our session. Delighted to have you here today. You have a panel on Friday for an HR manager role. And you're very excited. Of course you are. And congratulations for getting that far. The minority do. You'll only have 4 in the panel. That's interesting. That's quite a small panel. So should you assume there will only be 8 leadership principles that will be tested on? In theory, yes. Usually a interviewer is only assigned 2 leadership principles to get through. Now, yours is quite a small panel. It's unusual that you would have such a small panel, because effectively that would only be 3 interviewers and 1 bar raiser. So I'd be, let's go 85% confident that you should expect only 8 leadership principles to be tested. But because your panel is pretty small, the bar raiser might look at it and go, that's quite a limited data set. Bearing in mind, they're trying to make a decision based on all 14. And if you're only slightly over the, what would that, 57, 60% or something like that of the leadership principles will be covered by that, your bar raiser might think, I might want to throw in an extra 1 or 2 leadership principles, either to own myself because I'm quite an experienced interviewer and I can get through that many in an interview, or maybe in the hiring manager. So 80% confidence, you'll probably only get 8 covered, but it is possible that because it's such a small loop that the bar raiser might want to throw in an extra leadership principle for 1 or 2 of the interviewers. Okay, I hope that helps and good luck. We have our fingers crossed for you. I, of course, am speaking on behalf of all of the rest of you, but I'm going to assume that you're all generous people and you would also have your fingers crossed for Kai. Okay, let's move on. I hope that was helpful. Thank you for the question. Let's see what else we've got. Okay, meet the Mito. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining. And your question is, you've got your first phone interview. Should you expect leadership principles? You emailed the recruiter, good plan about this, and took that tip from one of your videos. So actually, it can vary a lot between different groups in terms of what they do at the first phone screen. If you're going for a quite technical role, the chances are very, very high, almost like definite, that they're going to be looking for technical information in your round 1. And it won't be a technical test per se, but they'll probably start digging quite deeply into your skills and your experience, and they might start asking you some technical questions. The point being is, if you can't meet the standard that they need for the technical nature of the role, there really is little point in moving you on. Now, those teams will do the technical, and then they might throw in a leadership principle as well. But there are some teams that won't do any leadership principle at all in the early rounds. They'll be very focused on the technical. There'll be other teams that do a bit of a balance, the technical and the leadership principles. And there will be other teams that really only focus on the leadership principles, because for them, the technical side of things can be taught. But the leadership principle side of things is generally part of your DNA. And that's particularly true of more junior roles, like some of the more junior roles in kind of the business rather than the engineering side of Amazon. The technical skills required at a junior level are ones that you can very much learn. So things like kind of vendor managers, marketing, product managers, etc. Those are quite learnable technical skills. So they tend not to so much focus on technical in the early rounds. So you're going to have to kind of make a bit of a judgment based on what I've told you and the role that it is that you're going for as to what to expect. But my advice to everybody is always over prepare. If you prepare for all 14 leadership principles, and you prepare for technical, and you prepare to walk through your CV, and you prepare the story about why you want to work at Amazon, then whatever you're asked, you're ready. And if you don't use it well, you don't use it. Better to over prepare and over invest in time and not to have to use it than to regret having not done that preparation and not move on because of having not done that preparation. That's my philosophy in life anyway. I am a planner and an over preparer, and I do believe it's the best strategy for Amazon, because you never quite know what you're going to get. Okay. It's a bit like Forrest Gump and the box of chocolates, if anyone knows that film. Okay, so thank you for that question. I'm going to move on now. I hope it was helpful. Oh, sorry, that just jumped. I lost track of that. Ooh. Yeah, that's a good question, Dan. So thanks, Dan. So you want to apply for an account management position in the middle mile facility. I think that's account manager. Anyway, AM. Your question is there a reason why some have to do an assessment and some not? So it won't be a case that some people going for the same role have to do an assessment and some don't. Everybody is going to go through the same experience for a particular role. In terms of whether there's a particular reason why some roles require assessments and some don't, it's a function of the role, really, and the level of the role. So some roles you'll have to do an Excel and maths, some roles you'll have to do like a maths competency. Other roles you'll have to do the online assessment. Other roles you'll have to do an Excel test. It's completely dependent on the role and the level and the amount of data that the hiring manager, oh, sorry, my screen's shaking, the amount of data that the hiring manager feels they need confidence in before they actually bring you into the business. So if the role includes a huge amount of Excel work, then the hiring manager might say it's kind of not enough to hear the stories of their past to know that they can do this type of work. I'm going to have to test them on Excel because it's not something I want to have to teach them when they arrive. So it's really just a function of the decisions being made by the hiring manager, or maybe the group kind of senior leaders above that hiring manager in terms of what they consider to be the best process to get into their organization. But there's no documented rules and regulations that I can point anyone towards internally that says who should and shouldn't do what assessment. So bit of a non-answer that one, Dan, I'm afraid, but it's very much kind of a local thing. Okay. Just moving on. Okay. G_D Sun. I'm going to pin this one because I think this is useful for everybody, but I think I need to provide some context. So I'm going to read out your question and then I'm going to create some context for everybody in case they don't know as much as you do. So the question is, if the key leadership principles is rated as mixed or some concern by the interviewer, any chance that the outcome is inclined? All right, so the context here is when your interviewer is assessing your answers, they obviously know what leadership principle they have asked you a question on. They also know the type of behaviors that are what good looks like for that leadership principle, because that's very clearly documented in Amazon. And they'll then look at the data that they've gathered for you on that leadership principle, either one or two questions, however many they ask, and cross-reference it back to what good looks like. Based on that cross-reference, and then based on their understanding of how other people in the organization operating at your level would behave in that situation. And yes, there's a lot of subjectivity about that, but that's the nature of interview processes overall. They'll decide whether they believe you calibrate in that leadership principle on a 5-point scale. And it goes from concern to some concern to mixed to some strength to strength. So the question I'm being asked is, if the key leadership principles, they're always doing analysis for all 14, but there are key leadership principles in every role that you will find written down in your job description if you interrogate it closely enough. There are key leadership principles. And the question is, if you are calibrated at mixed or some concern for those leadership principles, is there any chance that you're going to be get an inclined outcome? I would say no is the answer to that. So if maybe one of the key leadership principles was heading towards kind of mixed, yeah, someone could probably argue the case that that was a coachable skill, or yes, it was kind of important, but not the most important if you were really strong in other leadership principles that weren't necessarily the key leadership principles. But in general, if those are the key leadership principles, those are the leadership principles that you need to be able to be strong at to succeed in the role. And if you can't provide evidence that you are strong in those behaviors, then the reality is that you're probably unlikely to succeed in that role. And therefore, you would not be a good fit for that role. This then bleeds us into something slightly different, which is sometimes what happens is the key leadership principles for that role, a candidate does not show sufficient strength in, but they may show great strength in other leadership principles. At that point, a decision might be made that no, this candidate is not the right fit for this role, but we do think they've got lots of strength and could be a potential Amazonian, at which point you'll get a not inclined for that role, but your recruiter will try and see if there are other roles around the organization that you might be better fitted to. And they might then pass your details over to another hiring manager or another recruiter for them to consider you for their role. So it's still a not inclined. You still do not have a job until somebody's actually given you an offer letter, but it's not a entire rejection because you weren't strong on those leadership principles if you show you're strong on other leadership principles. Okay, so I hope that was helpful and that the context was useful for everybody. So moving on then. Oh, Latha, you're scheduled for 2 phone screens for the same role, but 2 different teams within the same week. I mean, that makes sense. There are lots of roles around Amazon that are broadly exactly the same roles, but different teams. So yeah, cool. Great. You've statistically doubled your chances of moving forward. So that's amazing. Michael. Okay. We'll talk referrals. Why not? So Michael's question is, and referrals is like a really hot topic, I know, or across social media and everywhere. I have a very particular view about referrals. So let's talk about it. I don't often cover referrals in these. So Michael would like to know, well, first of all, welcome, Michael. Thank you for joining us. Who is the best person to ask for a job referral for, an employee or a recruiter? So Michael, the only person that is worth asking a referral from is somebody who knows you and has worked with you before. There's no point in talking to somebody and asking them for a random referral if they don't know who you are. So find someone who you know, who you've worked with before, who has professional experience of you, and they can be your referral. It doesn't matter whether they are an employee. Sorry, it doesn't matter whether they're in that line of business, if they're a recruiter, if they're in security, if they're the catering staff. It really doesn't matter who they are in the organization. What matters is that they are paid by Amazon and that they will vouch for you. A referral, in my point of view, and I think most people's points of view, is me putting my reputation on the line and giving you the strength of my reputation and saying to one of my colleagues, this person is worth you spending time considering. I vouch for the fact that they are going to be, or could potentially be, really good fit for this role. If that person can't do that, if they can't say they know you and they know your strengths and they're going to put their credibility behind you, then they've got no right referring you, quite frankly. It's just a paper pushing exercise if they just take your random CV and pass it on. So if you don't have anyone inside the organization who knows you well and could put their reputation behind you, then if you want a referral, you need to go out and build those relationships. And that takes time. You're going to have to identify what role you want to get in Amazon, in what area. You're going to need to try and find somebody. LinkedIn is always a good place to start. You're going to need to find somebody who's in that space, who's active on LinkedIn. You're going to have to get engaged with their content. You're going to have to follow them. You're going to have to make intelligent observations. You're going to have to make sure that your name surfaces and they start to see patterns. And this person called Michael, who keeps commenting on my content and provides value add. And then in a few months' time, you can reach out to this person and say, you know, hi, it's me. You know me. I comment on your stuff all the time. I'd really love to know more about Amazon. I'd really like to understand your job and talk to you about whatever it is. Then you can start to build a relationship. But that's a long-term strategy. It's not a, hi, here's my CV. Could you please refer me? So I hope that's helpful. I appreciate I have a very different perspective on how referrals should work than most of what you see on social media, but I can pretty much assure you that my perspective is very much an Amazonian perspective. Okay, so thank you for the question, Michael. It was an interesting topic to explore. I don't usually cover that topic, so that was nice. Okay, so what have we got? Oh, right. Do you know what? I was beginning full 12, I was getting a bit confused. I thought, what's an ALP question? And I was like, ALP? But you mean an Amazon leadership principle question? Okay. So what's a good way to prepare for the Amazon leadership principle questions? Think of examples and then adhere them to each principle and create story. You're a bit lost. So My perspective is the very best way to prepare is to start with your experiences in the past. And actually, I have a really, really good module. I know, obviously, I will say this, but I do have a really good module in my Amazon interview preparation masterclass, which is only $35 to help you go through this exact process, beginning full 12. My view is you start with the things that you are most proud of in your career history. Start there. Start thinking about the things that you think are really impressive and kind of why you think they're really impressive. Like, you don't have to be an exact match to the leadership principles, but just like think about, I really, really made people change their minds, or I just did not give up on this one. I kept going until I got the answer, just so that you've got it in your head. And once you've got those big meaty examples that you really love, then you can start cross-referencing them to the leadership principles, and you can start seeing what leadership principles are present in this example. And then you can start mapping it to the leadership principles and where you can use the examples in your leadership principles. The next thing you've got to think about then is the key leadership principles for your role. So then you've got to ask yourself, okay, so I've mapped my biggest, best stories to leadership principles. Now I've got to see whether those leadership principles that it maps to is reflective of the key leadership principles for the job. And if it is, well, hey, if it's not, you're now going to have to think about some other stories in your career history to cover the key leadership principles for the job that you're going for. And then you add those. Then you've got some gaps, right? You've covered the key leadership principles. You've got some other leadership principles covered from the big stories that you loved from your past. And now you're going to have some gaps. So now it's a question of, well, what other stories can I find to fill frugality? I'm making up the ones that are missing, but to fill frugality, hire and develop the best, bias for action. I'm going to have to really, really think hard about examples from my past that will cover those leadership principles. That's my method. As I say, I have a very good module that will walk you through step by step how to prepare for interview in the Amazon Interview Whiz Academy. And I will put the link on at the end of the session so that you can go and have a look at that. Obviously, you can just have a look at the curriculum. No need to buy, but just check out the curriculum and that might help give you some structure. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Beginning full 12. Right. Let's see if we can find, there's lots of stuff popping up now. I'm going to just jump because a couple of people have asked me a few questions. I'm going to try and get to some new people and then I'll work my way backward and pray to God I don't get lost. Sorry, I've just got very excited here. Cesar, you got the offer from AWS. Well done. So Cesar is someone that we've had here regularly before and I've answered questions for, and you've got the job. So congratulations. I'm very proud. I'm very happy for you. Awesome, man. Well done. Great job. Tough thing to achieve and brilliant. Congratulations. Thank you for coming on and sharing. That means a lot to me. You've made my day. Okay, so let's have a look what else we've got. Oh, Kai, you're Academy member. Okay, so you know there'll be a bar raiser. Thank you so much for being part of the Academy. And I'm so pleased that you find the masterclasses useful. Awesome. Any feedback, by the way, that you can give me on the masterclasses, there is a link in the supporting materials section for a feedback form. So any feedback, please do send it through. I'm trying to keep improving the masterclasses as I go along from people's feedback. So I'd be really grateful if you'd provide some feedback. Thank you. Okay, let's see what else we've got. Yeah, okay, Stumbled and Gallivant. I'm going to pin this question because this is an awesome question that lots of people ask me across all the different channels that I engage with people on. So, is it advisable to use the answers that you used in the phone rounds in the panel interview? Can panelists ask the same leadership principle question asked during the phone round? And it's an SVM role. Okay, so I do recommend to people that they try, if possible, to avoid using the same examples between their different rounds. The reason being that if you think about your examples as your witnesses, I find a court case is quite a good analogy for this. you're effectively trying to prove your case in court that you are a bar-raising candidate for Amazon. And your examples come to court with you as your witnesses to say, yes, Your Honor, and panel of jurists, this person is a great candidate and will raise the bar. If you were to bring the same witness into court over and over again, the case that you're building doesn't become any more compelling because it's simply the same person saying the same thing over and over again. Whereas if you bring in different witnesses every time and you've got like 15, sorry, you can probably hear my dog whining, apologies for that. You've got 15 different witnesses coming to court and saying, yes, this person deserves to be considered a bar-raising candidate. That becomes incredibly compelling. Now, my caveat to that is sometimes that's just not possible, particularly if you're very early on in your career and you don't have a lot of career experience behind you. It's very hard to come up with that many unique examples. So if that's the boat that you're in, the other strategy that you should use is to make sure that when you reuse that example, your witness, you use it for a completely different leadership principle. So if you've used it before for customer obsession, use it for a trust example as an example, and really lean heavily into spinning that story so it sounds very, very different. Again, plug for my interview preparation masterclass. I demonstrate how you can do that in that masterclass using one example, but spinning it very differently for two different leadership principles. Your final question here is, can your panelists, interview panelists, ask you the same question between different rounds? In theory, they shouldn't do, because if they've done their due diligence as they're supposed to, they should have read what your data from round 1 and round 2 and seen what those interviewers asked you in terms of questions, because it's all captured, and avoid asking those questions in their interview. Very often, I can promise you, that due diligence doesn't happen for various reasons, obviously, busy people, yada, yada. And sometimes those questions can be brought back up again. My advice is, if that happens to you, you should say to the interviewer very specifically, I just want to let you know that I have had this exact question asked in my round 2 interviews. Would you like me to give you the answer that I gave them? Now, what they should say is, oh, actually, no, I don't want you to give me the same answer. Let me ask you another question, because there are between 7 and 15 different questions in the Amazon interview question bank per leadership principle. So they should have plenty of other options. Now, sometimes I do know that interviewers will say, yes, actually, I would like you just to answer that question again. Fine. If that's what they say, that's what they say. You've taken ownership of the situation and made them aware that this is not a new piece of data that you're going to be contributing to the pool of data, and they have specifically asked you to repeat the same information. That's fair enough. You've done your job. Okay, so I hope that helps. There's a few different strategies in there for you. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Oh, big jump there. Okay, John Joe, welcome. I'm not sure I recognize your name, so if this is your first time, thank you for joining me. Delighted to have you here. So when applying for a role in Amazon, it is mentioned avoid if already applied in the last 6 months. Is it with respect to the same role, or could you apply to another role? So I'd love to know where it is mentioned to avoid if you've already applied in the last 6 months, because I'm not sure that's something that Amazon specifically states publicly. Now, there are situations where candidates apply for roles and they are not considered to be fit for that role, and that is a not inclined. But then the panel will say, let's recycle them, which effectively means they can just go straight back into the pool. Excuse me, rubbing my eye. They can go straight back into the pool and apply for other roles if they fancy them. If a candidate gets a not inclined no recycle, then the recruiter will specifically tell the candidate, do not reapply again for another 6 months or 12 months. And that's because really the group have felt that the candidate is so far away from being bar raising across any of the kind of combined leadership principles that they really need to take some time out and go and get some bigger projects and more meaningful examples to bring back to panel. So I don't know where you're reading this, that it's mentioned to avoid applying again if you've applied in the last 6 months, but I don't believe that's true. That really is only the case when your recruiter has specifically told you, do not apply again for the next 6 to 12 months. If nobody says that to you, then apply. My point earlier on in the session still holds true. If you're going to apply multiple times in a small period of time, make sure you're applying for the same type of role, because otherwise, same scenario, the recruiter's going to look at it and say, why is 1 month he applying for a software development engineer and the next month applying for a product manager? Does not compute. But, you know, apply again unless someone tells you not to. If you have applied and failed like 3 times in 6 months, then my advice, and people often reach out to me and ask me this, my advice then is probably take a break. Not necessarily because Amazon will penalize you if you keep applying, but I personally think it's bad for anybody's mental health to keep being rejected through the same process. So applied multiple times in a 6-month period and got interviews and failed to pass those interviews, then I would say to you, stop applying, even if the recruiter doesn't. Okay, so I hope that was helpful, John Joe. And I'd be very curious to know where you've heard that. Maybe you'll tell me I'm wrong, that it's written on a website, on an Amazon website somewhere. And if that's the case, I will chew my hat, I think is the expression. But I'd be surprised if it was. Okay, thank you for the question, John Joe. Okay. Okay, Andrew G, I'm going to pin at your question. Welcome, Andrew G. Thank you for joining us. So, should you expect all 14 leadership principles to be asked in loop/pod? I'm not sure what pod is, but okay. No, because it will be impossible to get through all 14 leadership principles unless you have a massive panel. I have led bar raised on panels of like 7 people. And on that size panel, yes, you can get through all 14 because each 7 has 2 leadership principles, and there you go, you're at 14. But if you're in a loop panel that's kind of 5 people big, 6 people big, there's just not enough people to get through all of those leadership principles. And if you're working on a panel that's like 5 or 6, then it's unlikely your bar raiser will insist any more leadership principles go to each individual interviewer than 2. So you are unlikely to ever be asked on all leadership principles. But that doesn't mean that your interviewer isn't going to pick up other leadership principles as you describe your story. Because I'm sure as you're preparing your stories, you'll know that within those stories, you've got a couple of different leadership principles bubbling up, which is why you'll probably spin those stories to cover 2 possible leadership principles. But actually, as candidates tell their stories, we inside Amazon are much more acutely aware of the behaviors of the leadership principles. And quite often candidates don't even realize that some really good data is bubbling up for leadership principles that they weren't specifically asked about, but are just present in their examples. So what will happen over the course of 5, 6 people interviewing you is, although that they're only going to, let's go for the 5 scenario, only 10 leadership principles are going to be actively covered by those 5 people. The truth is, as you give your example, the other 4 leadership principles that they're not specifically asking you on as a group might just bubble up naturally. And then when they do their assessment, they will make note of, well, I wasn't testing Andrew for frugality, but Andrew started talking about blah, blah, blah. And that was actually really good evidence for frugality. And they will take that into consideration when they're doing the overall debrief, and they will calibrate you on that because they have identified it naturally and organically from something that you've said. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. So very unlikely you'll be asked about all 14, but when they do the assessment of the overall leadership principles, they will be looking at the full picture of all 14 if all 14 actually surfaced at some point in your interview. Okay, I hope that was helpful, Andrew. I'm just going to have a quick drink. Sorry, guys. I also realized I didn't apologize for the duvet in the corner. I won't go into the story why there's a duvet in the corner, but it's useful, promise. All right, so let's move on. Okay, Steve, I'm going to cover this off because there's a nuance here. So Steve is asking, are there different selection criteria for more senior roles? And what are the levels and what do they go up to? Okay, quite a few questions in there, Steve, so let me unpack them. So no, there are no different selection criteria. The same process applies for everybody that goes through Amazon. You've got your technical bits if you need it, and then you've got the leadership principles. And the questions that you're asked on those leadership principles are exactly the same. What difference is the scope and complexity expected of your examples as you get more senior. Now, that scope and complexity is reflected in the job standards. So Amazon not only has very detailed information about the leadership principles and what the behaviors are in the leadership principles, they also have very, very detailed documentation on job standards expected of different levels. So what you do as an interviewer is you've got the job standards in one hand, so you know at what type of level they're supposed to be operating, how many people they're supposed to be managing, what interaction levels that you would expect in terms of senior management, what decision making, what budget. You'd see that in the job standards. And as you're listening to the stories that come through in the interview, you're using that information to give you a sense of, is this the right scope and complexity for this level? And then you're asking yourself, within the context of that scope and complexity, am I seeing the type of leadership principle behaviors I would want to see? So a good example would be if I was testing for earns trust and I was testing for someone who's an L8, who is a director, I'd be looking at my job standards and I'd be looking to see, well, who are they supposed to be interacting with? You know, who are the type of customers or the type of internal stakeholders that I'm expecting this director of vendor management to interact with? And I can see mostly C-suite, you know, major owners of suppliers, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so then I'm looking at the examples and I want to see, does the example demonstrate them operating at that level, or are the examples that they've given me about building bridges or coaching, building bridges or repairing or building advocates, those types of things for the facets of earns trust. If they're talking about it at very junior people level, and this is all about them building bridges with junior managers, I'm going, right, well, that's not it, right? Right. That's not the type of scope of complexity. I might be seeing the behavior, but behavior is happening at a level like 3 layers down where they need to be in terms of the job standard. So the process is exactly the same. The criteria becomes nuanced difference depending on the job standard and the level and the scope and complexity of the role that they're applying for. I hope that makes sense. How many levels are there? There are 12 levels. There is an L1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then it used to be Jeff, but I guess it's not Jeff anymore. It's Andy. But yeah, it's a deep organization, I suppose. When you're talking about kind of the people who are more in the business area of things, it really generally starts at L5s, grads, and those types of guys come into the business at an L5 level. Obviously, the 1, 2, 3s, 4s, etc., they tend to happen much more in the operations side of things. But jobs in Amazon, although 12 seems like a lot of levels, kind of when you're thinking about the business side of things, you're really only looking at between 4 and 12. And the jobs themselves and the levels have huge diversity and scope. Like you can have a very green L4 or you can have a very experienced L4. What they're looking for in terms of employing people is that you can be that top half of the, I'm using L4 as an example, that you can be that top half of the L4 population and raise the bar of the L4 population overall. But it's not helpful. I had this conversation with one of my one-to-one candidates the other day about comparing job levels between their current employer and Amazon, and they were trying to say, well, these are the levels in my company, and how does that fit the level that Amazon is recruiting for in this role? And my advice is just don't try and get your head around that. You can never do an exact like for like match. You just got to think about the scope and complexity of the role as it's being described to you, and then of course the compensation discussion of the role. And that's really the best way to think about, is this the right level for me? Okay, so I hope that was helpful, Steve. I'm going to unpin you. Thank you very much for the question. Let's have a look. Ooh, we've got quite a few, so I'm going to just scroll. Okay, the Atheist 00 Agent. That is just such a cool name. I got to work harder in coming up with cool names. You guys just nailing it. Okay, so the question is, should you use one of your main stories for the written exercise? And if you do, can you repeat the story in panel, or should you pick a random weaker story for the question? It's the invent and simplify one. Okay. So my point of view is, every time you can do a brand new question, that's another witness. That's a good thing. It can only be a good thing. But the reality is most people can't, and that's fine. When it comes to the written exercise, the purpose of the written exercise, and just for context, not everybody has to do a written exercise. Anyone that's coming into the organization at L6 or above generally is asked to do a written exercise. Sometimes people who are going into roles that are very heavy on writing, like product management roles or learning and development roles, they're asked to do a written sample at lower levels. But generally, if you're an L6 or above, you'll be asked for a writing sample. The purpose of the writing sample is to prove that you can write, basically, because no decision is ever made in Amazon without someone having written a document. So knowing that a senior leader, L6 and above, can actually write something clearly and concisely and convey a message and a story in written form is really, really important. That is the far more important part of the written exercise than the actual nature of the example itself. So very often, and to no detriment, you'll find candidates use the same example in their written example as they do in interview, and that's fine. There's no detriment to that at all. Really, really just focus on the quality of the writing for the written sample. That's why it's there. If they are able to put in a brand new example, then great. Maybe the bar raiser or the hiring manager, who are the only two people who will look at the written sample, are looking for an extra bit of evidence off the back of a conversation in the debrief. They might refer to the written sample and say, oh, but there was some more data here in the written sample that we didn't capture here in the interview, and I'm going to draw that out and put it on the table in the debrief. But generally, it's an exercise around, can this person write? Do we feel comfortable that they can string a sentence together? So I would say, feel free to use the same example again, whether it's a middle pack example or whether it's your best example. It doesn't really matter too much. What matters most is that you write it really well. I do have a video on my YouTube channel all about how best to do your writing sample and tips on a great writing sample. So please do go check that one out. Okay, so I am conscious of time. We have 6 minutes left. So let's just see. Okay, Navin, thank you so much for asking this question. This is one of my favorite questions. It lets me get on my soapbox. Excuse me, I'm just going to close my door because my dog just opened it. There we go. Otherwise, the acoustics get ruined because I have such good acoustics in this room. Navin would like to know, welcome, by the way. You would like to know, how do we identify who the bar raiser is? And are their questions any different from the other interviewers? So the reason why I like this question is clearly I sell myself on being a bar raiser. And I sell myself in a bar raiser because I've seen it all. I've done it all. I really am an expert about how the leadership principles work, what good looks like in an interview, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That matters to Amazon because they want my expertise or other bar raisers' expertise to get a really good outcome in terms of the very best candidate. But as far as the candidate is concerned, it does not matter a jot who your bar raiser is. Your interview experience with your bar raiser will look no different at all than the interview experience with any of the other interviewers. They will be assigned a leadership principle or two or three. They don't get to pick it. It will be assigned to them by the recruiting coordinator or by the hiring manager. They will ask you questions from exactly the same question bank as everybody else will be going for their questions from. The information that they're looking for from your answers is exactly the same as the information everybody else is looking for their example. So there's nothing special about the bar raiser interview experience for you as a candidate. So you guys really, really should not waste your energy worrying about who the bar raiser is, because to you, it shouldn't make a difference. You should go into every interview with your strongest possible answers to deliver your best possible interview, because on the other side, your bar raiser is going to see it anyway, because it's all written down, and they're going to have a conversation with all of the interviewers who met you. So if you happen to give your stellar example in an interview that is not the bar raiser, it doesn't matter. Bar raiser is going to see it, and the interviewer is going to talk to them about it. So it's as good as you giving them the example direct to their face. So honestly, don't worry about working out who the bar raiser is, and they definitely will not have any different questions for you. There are no special strategies. Please genuinely ignore this nonsense that I see quite regularly on YouTube and other places about, here's a whole session about bar raiser strategies. This is what you should do at an interview with a bar raiser. It's utter nonsense. I was a bar raiser. I trained other people to be bar raisers, and I tell you categorically, there is no difference in the experience for you, whether you're being interviewed by a bar raiser or you're being interviewed by an interviewer or by the hiring manager. Yes, it is possible to try and work out who the bar raiser is sometimes. What you might see is everybody else looks like they're from broadly the same group, and then you've got this other random person who looks like they couldn't possibly have anything to do with that team whatsoever. So if you think about little old me being the bar raiser, I did bar raising on, I don't know, finance roles in AWS. So this person would have had a whole bunch of interviewers that are clearly finance people or AWS people. And then suddenly you see this random GG person who's from Amazon Fresh and they're a marketer. Okay, she's obviously the bar raiser. But it's not that obvious every time, and sometimes it's completely unclear who the bar raiser is, and you could waste time and energy trying to work it out. Don't bother. Treat everybody like they're the bar raiser, and you will not go wrong. And by treat everyone like the bar raiser, I mean do your best in every single interview, and that's all you need to worry about. Everything else that matters about the bar raiser is done behind the scenes and matters for Amazon, not for you. Okay, so thank you for asking that question. I know I went on a bit of a rant, Naveen, but I actually feel very passionately about the misinformation that gets circulated around bar raisers and worries candidates to a level that I think is totally unproductive and unhelpful for them as to who the bar raiser is. I think it's bad for candidates to big up the necessity to understand who the bar raiser is. So thank you for the question. I appreciate the opportunity to get on my soapbox. Okay, so I think, guys, we are just about at time. So I'm sorry. I know there's a few other questions here that I haven't got to yet. So please come back again on Wednesday. I have another session on Wednesday. I'll post it on LinkedIn, and it will obviously be there on YouTube in terms of advertised. So you can come back and ask me your question then. If you're absolutely desperate to ask me the question, then pop on to YouTube, find the relevant video, and you can pop the question in there and I will pick them up. Usually I answer YouTube questions within about 48 hours. In the meantime, I have put the link to, and I'm going to share the link to my Amazon Interviewers Academy. I know I mentioned the interview preparation masterclass, which I do think is a great class, by the way. Of course I would. You can find that there, but also I offer a customer obsession masterclass completely free. It dives deep into customer obsession. Now, obviously, I offer it free because I would love you guys to take it and believe in the quality of my work and buy some of my other masterclasses. But I chose customer obsession because it's just the most foundational leadership principle for the entire of Amazon. And if you can nail that one, that's a very good start to your interview. So please go take it up. It's totally free. I promise you, I will not chase you and try and get you to buy other products. Go take it. If it sells itself, then I've done my job. If it doesn't sell itself, then that's on me. Okay, what time on Wednesday? So it is 5:30 British Standard Time. I can't quite remember all of the other time zones, but if you go back into my posts, either on LinkedIn, you'll find me promoting it. I usually promote the Wednesday one on a Tuesday. So you'll see all of the different time zones on there, but I think I operate across about 7 time zones and I never remember them all. So it would be 5:30 British Standard Time. And then if you could work back from that, Navin, into your local time zone, then that would be great. Okay, everybody, so I'm losing people now. So thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. If you've got an interview this week, fingers crossed for you. For you guys that managed to get roles, congratulations. I'm so thrilled for you. And thank you for joining and letting everybody know. Be safe. I know the world is going nuts out there at the moment. I'm actually off for my COVID vaccine now, my first COVID vaccine, which is a big, big day for me. I lost my dad to it, so I am very excited about heading off now. So be safe, everyone. I think about all of you out there, and I hope to see you again on Wednesday or maybe next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.